Morning, everyone. So I'm here to talk about my thoughts of Marvel Crisis Protocol after just over 6 months, maybe about 7 months of playing right now. For those who don't know me, you see me sometimes in the TTS League talking. I I've been wargaming for I never remember how many years, but it's been almost 20 years at this point, or a little bit less than 20 years. I've been the USA captain for Warhammer. I've been overseas for Malifaux. So, from a competitive standpoint, I've done a lot of competitive wargaming, and so this maybe review of the game, and it's not gonna be super detailed. I picked out a couple things I like and maybe dislike. Um, it's coming from that competitive standpoint, um, and it's pretty much how I've played most of the games in my past. At least attempting to be at a competitive level, and the same with Marvel. I take it, I try my best. I have fun with it. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but so these review is coming from a lot of gaming and just why am I still playing it, and why do I feel like I'm gonna continue to play it for a bit going forward. I think before we even get into the rules, I think the general thing that's keeping me around or keeping me interested right now is just the convenience of the TTS mod. Obviously, I have the mod up right now, and I think I don't know how many games I've played, maybe 70 to 80 games so far. I think I played 3 in person, maybe 4. Most of them are on TTS. That's just because of life, right? Like, it's so much easier to pop open the mod, which is a great mod, by the way. The creators, I appreciate it. It's easier to play on the mod than in person. And honestly, I prefer it at this point playing on the mod. Not just for the convenience of sitting at home and doing it on a computer, being able to do other things, but it's just cleaner. The everything's set with the tokens, no bumping them and stuff like that. Which is just it's a factor of real life gaming. But I do appreciate that I can practice on the mod, and it doesn't feel like it takes away as much from playing on the table, at least from my limited table experience. Game times, 2 hours, 2.5 if you're really talking and it's really engaging, but 2.5, it doesn't feel like overwhelming. And if you really want a quick game, you can get done probably an hour and 90 minutes, which is great. It doesn't feel playing after work. It doesn't feel like a drag. I mean, I used to play during the pandemic. I played Ninth Age Online, which is like Universal Battle, and you're talking 4 to 6 hour games depending on how fast your opponent is. And it just was a grind. And that was before my kid was born. And now with after him, being able to put him to bed and then play a game and not feel like fried, going into the next day of work. It's been really great. The community, great online community. Like I said, I've played probably 70 games online and not that many duplicate people. I played a lot of unique people, maybe like 40-ish. And I can honestly say, like, they've mainly been great. Like, there's a few people who maybe complain about dice a little more than I would like, but not in like a horrible way. Now, I've played much worse people in other games. And we'll see if this extends when I go to tournaments and in person. But I've really liked the community. There's several top players who I've messaged on the side because I'm not really in the specific discords. I guess there's a couple out there that's more than the TTS, like the main one. I guess Danger Room. I'm not really in those. I don't. Sometimes I get a little annoyed with listening to opinions of people. At least like the mass like internet talk. I don't want it to sway my opinion too much, especially as I'm like learning the game and trying to get better. Obviously, in the beginning, I like having some ideas, but then you eventually develop your own and say, I actually think this is good, and I don't think I don't know if I believe you anymore. And they're not bad, but I just tend not to read them. But I have the few top players I've been messaging have been very kind to me and helpful. And so that's like the overarching. That's something that's really keeping me around. It's just because from a practice perspective and timing, it's just been really great. So let's talk about maybe the rules itself and things I like coming over, and then maybe some things I dislike. Again, it's not a trying to rip into the game, and I'm not trying to, make AMG go and change a bunch of rules, or like I guess there's conversations that come up a lot of times on the discords of like, we should change Malekith, or we should change X-Men, or Storm's leadership, and shit's gonna happen, and I can't control that. But it's not meant to be that level of like bashing or anything like that. So starting off, I think the thing with any game is how you do list building, scenarios, stuff like that. In a Warhammer world, it is I make a however many point list you're playing. I played fantasy, not much 40k, and then what is the scenario for that game and deployment? And my enemies list is locked, and it's just boom, 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 boom. Can I make a generalized list? Do I need to? Am I being skewy and hoping to not get bad matchups? I will. And Malifaux was more similar to this, where you could basically, I said, I am a Gremlin player, and then my opponent would say, I play Neverborn, and you can take whatever you want within that. There is no restrictions. You could have as big or as small of a selection as you wanted, which has pluses and minuses. It's nice being able to cater a little bit to the scenario and to what your opponent plays, and not feel like you're at a huge disadvantage to begin with. But it also, from a planning perspective, you're kind of guessing sometimes what is the enemy going to take, and I think Marvel was a nice blend of that where, okay, I have 10 models, and sure, if I only take Sam, I'm going to take Sam, but you don't know, am I going to go Hulk? Am I not going to go Hulk? Am I going to go, Pyro or not? Whatever, with some restrictions. So you have a sense of what I'm doing, but you don't know exactly what I'm going to do. And I have some freedom if, I need to fill a hole in a bad matchup. I can put in a model, a splasher model. And I like that, because I don't like going into games knowing I'm at a huge disadvantage just because of the list I built, and, crossing my fingers and hoping that I get certain matchups. And maybe, I choose Sam. I know there's some other factions, I guess, that complain a little bit more about bad matchups and whatnot. I feel like Sam can beat anybody as if you play well enough and you are smart. And I like that, because I like going into the game and saying, hey, I'm not going to lose, hopefully, turn 0, which I have done, just by taking the wrong models. But I haven't left a game saying, wow, there is absolutely no way I can beat that with my crew. Or squad. And if there is, I feel like there's room for me to change it, whether it's in my play or my crisis or my tactics card selection. So I like that. I like going in, when I'm in the leagues and stuff. Maybe you want to avoid the good players if you really want to win all your games. But it's not like I see the Malekith player and be like, oh my god, I can't beat Malekith. I hope I don't play him. I've actually beat most of the Malekith players. And what I meant, but that's not the same as in some other games. Malifaux was like that too, where I could take whatever I wanted, and I felt I could beat anything, given that I had the tools. So I really like the squad building. Some things are a little oversplashed. I don't know how. There's a fine line between affiliations and then what we call affiliations, and it ends up being 3 miles from the affiliation and then just a bunch of splashes. That's fine. The Crisis, I actually didn't like this when I started. I was like, why don't you just play random? But as I've played more, I kind of like that it's almost, you can build your squad that's good at certain things, and you kind of take those, but you're not always, you're not getting both of the ones you want all the time. And I like the way that Priority gets to pick their set of 3, but it's still random from there. And then the person with Priority who lost it gets to pick the points, so they have some say in it too. Tactics cards, it's a cool addition to it, restricted and stuff. I like that they're restricting some. I think it's a good way to do it. Keep it limited. I do, one thing I'll say, just staying on my soapbox, I think in the last 8 online tournament games, I've never gotten Priority, and I've lost one of them. I think the Priority, Dean said it best to me in a DM, where he's like, priority doesn't matter until it does. And I do think it's a little overblown, but that's just my opinion. But I really like the scenario squad building crisis. I think there's a lot of variety there, and I even still think now, I want to make a video. I made a video on Sam, was my first MCP video. I feel like there's 2 splash slots in the list you see here. It's Logan and X23, where I think with the other 8 models, the non-Logan and X23, I think I could just have those 8 models, and I could do extremely well and not even worry about my 2 flex picks, to be completely honest. So now, because that core, I feel so comfortable with it, and I feel it can deal with almost everything, finding that little, that fine tuning of, who really goes there and when are you going to use them? because it's so different, like what affiliations are going to play and what crisis cards they're going to pick. And even the crisis cards I choose, I'm not totally set on them because I think there's room to, you know, I don't know all the matchups well enough to know, well, is there something I can like I played Demons downtown for a while, and I took it out because I think I'm good on it, but I'm tired of giving teams Demons that really love Demons, like Guardians who are really popular, stuff like that. So I'm like, well, maybe if I don't take it, like I know I can handle it if it comes up, but I don't want to organically give it to them. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, is there something in there that's kind of annoying to go after? But anyway, squad building is one of my likes. What else did I put? I have a list. One thing about gameplay, generally speaking, that I like, and I like and don't like. So I'll make this comment, and it'll blend into my dislike of it. Is I like that from the first turn you're in it to do stuff, right? You're picking up objectives, you're holding secures, you're sometimes doing attacks, you're moving things around. There's not like a super long waiting period before you're getting into it. But at the same time, I don't like that that if you mess up turn one so poorly, you can almost just lose the game because the enemy doesn't have to do anything. So there is a gameplay aspect of like stealing and just sitting on your back secures and being like, I'm up by 1 and I'm going to win over time unless you do something. I don't love that. Now, one thing to remember is I'm coming from a game of Warhammer, which was my main game. Malifaux was my second main game, I'd say, where some people just sat in the corner and shot you and won by a small margin because it was too risky to go out and kill the enemy because it had like the defender's advantage per se. So it's definitely not to that level, and there is some impact. I mean, a lot of the games that maybe happened to me, or I've done it to somebody, is it's just like somebody either misplayed something in turn 0, turn 1, or a skill difference where like a lot of newer players or whatever worse players like to kill your models, and then they don't step on points, and you know all they want to do is walk up and kill you, and they're not scoring anything, and all of a sudden it's like 12-3 in round 3, and you're like, well, you just spent way too many actions doing stupid stuff, and you know dazing pyro didn't do anything for you, and so I do think in a good way the better player actually does win a lot more of the time, but in a non-good way, if the skill is very like night and day, and they don't play the scenario well or the crisis well, it just feels like a blowout, and it's just like, whatever, why am I doing this? But I do like that the gameplay is pretty quick and you get into it very fast, and you're not like spending a bunch of time waiting. Like Warhammer, you're probably spending 45 minutes to an hour almost just deploying, getting stuff ready, and then rolling, you know, maybe doing your first turn moves, which aren't always that exciting. You know, Marvel deployment's easy. It's there's nuance to it that impacts turn 1 and 0, but it's not so bad that like you need this super precision of every single deployment you do. Okay, so now let's look into some specific mechanics that I really like, and ones that really are different than other games. Obviously, games roll dice and stuff like that, and you know that's nothing new. The one that really stuck out to me was the Dazing Mechanic, and how for most models, you have to daze them and then KO them. And coming from a game like Malifaux, where you'd walk up to a game and you'd be like, I'm going to try this new model, and then the other person just snipes them off the board like turn 1, and you're like, oh, this sucks, I don't get to play with them. At least in Marvel, you have a chance, like, if they daze it, then, you know, you get a chance to come back on your injured side and do something. You don't just instantly lose it, and getting something dazed isn't always like the end of the world. I think this kind of goes into the second point, which is, and they kind of go together, is the power mechanic, where you need power to do things, and other than maybe hitting people and generating power, the best way to get power is to be attacked. So as people attack you, and if they do it improperly, you're getting power to kind of counterpunch and rubber band back. And so there becomes this dance of like, should I attack it? Should I not attack it? Now that's the good side of it, because I like that aspect where, you know, getting in it and getting, being attacked kind of powers you up, and both sides of it. If people are both engaged, some of the best games of MCP are tactical positioning, but also tactical dazing and maybe not throwing somebody away and not giving them power. I think the extreme of it, which is like, I'm going to just not attack you ever, and I'm just going to generate just enough power to throw you off, that is where it gets a little bit like, this sucks, right? So I do think there's always a plus and minus to that kind of thing. But I really like the power mechanic. I think it's, I don't know, I like it. I like it, and I like the Dazing Mechanic. I like that, you can run up with a model, get it one shot or two shot, and get it killed and have it stand back up. This goes into priority where I like, I think tall lists, and this is kind of maybe a negative, tall lists that like get priority and like do a bunch of, they always go first and they just kill a bunch of things and daze all your models. That does suck, but I do like that you're going to know who goes first. In Malifaux, I played a style similar to Sam Spam where I had a lot of activations and you couldn't pass back in the day. I played M2, not M3. You couldn't pass if you had more. So I'd have like 13 sometimes and somebody would have 7, and I would just, one of the strategies I did for a while, I think it got nerfed. It did. Was I had these little like piglets that were like no points, and I would just run like 4 of them, basically the cost of one normal model, and I would just run them up and be like, whatever, I don't care. They either take time to be killed or they blow up and they kill people. But I would pass. It's basically like passing like 4 times, and so by the time my good stuff went, I got to do like back to back to back to back to back, and I MCP will never have that issue because like the biggest discrepancy of models is like 7 to 3 probably. Like 9 is doable, but we don't talk about that. It's really like 6 to 3, right? That's really like a realistic differential, and so they can pass enough so you get the last one. But like I like that who's going to go first, and it's not like Malifaux where you can be like, I'm going to activate Hulk last, and I know and I have a chance to go first the next time and fuck you up. So, there are, again, negatives to this where really tall lists that are super fighty, they can pass enough, and that's something I kind of don't love. So, like, if you're wide and you have, like, Hulk as your last model, that's a really impactful activation where a tall list may have to be wary of your last activation. But if you're like all 3 threats and they can pass enough to where like the last thing you do is, I don't know, some Iron Man or something, it's not the end of the world because they can usually take the shot. So it doesn't, and then they get to go first and do whatever they want. Would I change the game? Would I make it so you can't pass? Would I make it so you can only pass once? I don't know. I don't have a good solution to that, but I think there is something with, high threat models that is kind of obnoxious. Speaking of, measuring wise, I will say this is like, it's pros and cons a lot. From a measuring perspective, I'm not going to say I'm like a huge fan of like the fact that there's different, like you have to use their sticks and there's no tape measure. There is an ease to that. I do think they were pretty smart, generally speaking, about the measurements. Sometimes there's just like, I don't know, sometimes when I think about something like, oh, this is just out if you do it properly. I think is this one actually true? Let me just see if it's true. Because everything's front to back, it becomes, I think if you move medium, yeah. Like if you move medium with a 35 millimeter base, a small base, I think you're just out of 3, like just barely, because the 3 is 6 inches, the medium's 5, and then your base is just over an inch long. So because it's front to back, you get out. Was that intentional? I don't know, but I like that it's like it feels intentional enough. Like, oh, if you're securing something, you're always within 2 of an enemy who's also securing it. Things like that. Like the measurements feel smart in the distances. And in a way, it's interesting that it's simplistic, that you can walk through people, which, I'm not used to that. In Malifaux, you could like body block people, and you actually have like an aura around you where, like an engagement aura, like if you could not walk through it. There's like rules within it. I forget them because it's been a while. But here you can just freely walk around people, walk away from them. I don't know if I want a mechanic where you can kind of make sure people stay close to you. There'd probably be an issue there. One thing I really like is in Malifaux, this is an example, is when you push away or you throw or something, it's pushing away and toward. It's a middle to middle, always. So it's much easier to block like backstop things or make it very tight. I like that throws away and towards this game give you some wiggle room of like an arc, or like a 90-degree arc. I think it's a smart measurement thing. On the negative side, the age-old argument of pre-measuring, I think, is you can do enough pre-measuring in this game that it doesn't really matter that you can't. There are some situations where you put down the ruler and you're just like, I don't know if I can make it. And then sometimes you risk it and you're like, fuck, I'm just out. Usually it's not so detrimental that, game over type thing. I don't see why pre-measuring is all that bad, to be completely honest with you. If you're playing, part of it feels like it would be faster. It might be slower initially as people want to measure a million things. But you can only measure so much, and there's only so many perfect distances. But then now people are finding random ways and looking at spots on the board and trying to memorize. I'm gonna put a 4 down here, I'm gonna put a 4 down here, and I need to be about here, and hopefully I get it right. As opposed to just being let me just put my base here. Oh, I'm not within 4. From a tactical standpoint, I don't think pre-measuring makes you worse. I think it opens up lines for maybe more, not more interesting, but I don't know how to put it. I think there's interesting tactical things you can do if you could pre-measure just a little bit more. Just a little bit. Because things like body blocking a secure, I don't have any crisis out, with 2 models, you can kind of you can really actually measure to see if they can fit a base there. But I don't know, I just wish I could do it. I don't even know how much I would use it, because at the same time, measurements and movement in Marvel are much less rigid than, what am I trying to say here? You can walk through people, you can walk away from people, there's no engagement. The ranges are actually pretty freaking big, generally speaking, 3, 4, 5. You're not in this, the board's kind of small. I don't know, it feels like it's not as impactful. There's a lot more wiggle room. There are very specific instances where you can get the perfect measurement. But even a good example might be, I want to be out of 2 for martial discipline, but in 3 for stealth. That's a 3-inch gap between that you can get it in. That's pretty simple, right? It just, if you could pre-measure, I think it would potentially open up some more nuanced tactical placements that I'm sure people and top players know about, but matter a lot less because it's hard to get you to that game state without pre-measuring. And I also understand the other thing where it's it wants to speed up the game, blah blah blah. I don't know. I don't sit here and begrudge not being able to pre-measure things. I'm used to it in games, pre-measuring. But I also don't think that they're kind of they're on a high horse, and I'm just I don't even think it's that bad. One more, another kind of not dislike but kind of interesting fun is they have their own dice. So there's a lot of things in Marvel that I both appreciate and it kind of makes me laugh a little bit. I think the dice one is also one where in the beginning I was this just feels egregious. 8-sided dice. They do, I don't know if it's on purpose, but it feels like their dice mechanics and the way when you reroll, what you can reroll, it's after crits, so crits don't, rerolls can't become crits, they become more dice, and that's fine. I'm not disparaging that, but it really muddies the math. And I do math for a living. I make Excel spreadsheets with math all the time. It's not that I can't do the math. It's just it's kind of convoluted, and rolling 5 versus 3. There's calculators out there that can do it, and then there's all these do you count blanks, do you not count? It's not as intuitive to be okay, I need to roll 12 dice and I need to get 4s, and then I need to get 5s, and then they have a 4+ save, and so that averages 1, and maybe some standard deviation from there. It's not a big deal because I think you can play a lot of this game on feel, like, and there's moments where something happened to me, and I go back and do the math afterwards. I'm like, oh, that was like 25%. That's not as bad as I thought it would be. But I do find it funny that it's very muddied. But I'll admit that they do a good job of utilizing the 8-sided dice. I think in the beginning, hit, crit, wild being like hits, quote unquote, and I'm like, why are they separate? But then you're like, oh, you can put triggers on the wilds, and crit does extra dice, so that's something extra, and then you can kind of build your game off of, I want something to trigger on a hit, so it's a little more likely, or I want something to trigger on a wild, because the wilds are less likely, or I want something to trigger on a crit wild, so that it's even less likely, and you can't reroll skulls, so that has a purpose to it. But then on the defense dice, it's, defending is a little bit harder than attacking, and we get to use the same dice, and so when you get into it and you kind of learn the cards and learn what symbols mean, it's much easier. I mean, this game is a symbol overload to a new player because, the range is all its own symbols, the medium moves, the health, the size symbol, all the 6 different sides of the dice, one being blank, so 5 different symbols on the dice. The different types of superpowers. There's just a lot of stuff on it, I'll say. But yeah, so my dislike was pre-measuring. High threat models. I do feel like 6 is probably on the upper limit of the 7s and the 8s. I'm not a fan of 3 wide teams. I think 4. I'm not saying 4 should be the minimum. And I've seen some games and play. I don't know if I've ever played 3 wide. I probably have once or twice. 3. It just doesn't feel as cool. I mean, I've watched too many of the Twitch streams where it's Malekith and 2 models versus some other bullshit. And it's whatever. I don't like watching Malekith play. I think it's boring. I don't know what's worse, Malekith or running away type styles like X-Men can be. I think they both are kind of lame in their own sense. Do I think they're super negative for the game? Maybe on the extremes. I've actually enjoyed playing against Malekith, generally speaking, just because it's a puzzle to solve, and he at least comes at you, and you have chances. And if you take models to deal with him, you have a chance. Thanos is not the most exciting game in the world, to be completely honest with you. Maybe runaway styles like webs is probably the worst that I dislike. But it's also probably the style I'm least good at playing against right now. I'm getting better at it, but it just feels kind of shitty. I like the puzzle when you're both kind of, at least with Malekith and having Sam's leadership, you're it's a puzzle of are they going to kill something and I'm going to use my leadership, and you're there's a fun engagement puzzle as opposed to they grabbed my extract and walked away and now they ran back to their secures and all they have to do is sit there unless I come at them. I think that's dumb. And I think because turn 1 and turn 0 has so much plays, air quotes, to make, a lot of people, I'll just say bluntly, jack around, oh my god, I came up with this amazing thing, I'm going to do all this shit, and I'm going to I mean, the same with Lockjaw, right? The whole Lockjaw teleporting Malekith up, that kind of stuff. I'm just alright, genius. I wish, it's hard to make content past turn 1 because so much can happen, but there's definitely a lot of people who act like the first turn is the only turn of the game, and that's what puts me off of a lot of content and a lot of styles. And that's one reason I love Sam's leadership so much, is it is a reactive, hey, we're in the shit, I get to do something, you don't know what's coming, per se. When you daze a model, but, it's not all based around some turn 1 thing that's happening. And so, as I take the fight to somebody, they have something to think about, and it just gives you more stuff to think about, so... Again, I try not to digest too much content. I don't really listen to podcasts, to be completely honest with you. I haven't for any game. It's not Marvel content creators. It's just I don't really like listening to it. And so that kind of talk just kind of, I'm like, I'm not interested in it. And people just have very strong opinions of like, this is good, this is bad, this is OP. And then I'm like, are you actually a good player? Should I trust you? Because you can say anything on the internet. You guys could be listening to me and be like, this guy's full of shit, right? Or you could be listening to me and be like, this guy, you could just blatantly trust me for no reason, just because I said I was decent at games. But yeah, I think those are my high level ones. I was trying to make a video about going like super deep into different aspects of it and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. It's just hard to talk about every little thing in this game. There's just a lot going on, and I think I hit the high level things. I really enjoyed this game. I'm having a lot of fun playing it. The models are cool. I'm getting them painted by a friend. Because I'm not a great painter, but I do feel like you should have painted models for tournaments. That's a drama. But I don't think painting should be in your score. You shouldn't win a tournament because you're better at painting. But having gray models at big events, I think, is ridiculous. And big events should always require painting. And small community events don't need it. I'm totally, that is how if you're going to Nova, if you're going to LVO, you should require painting. Because it's not only for you, but your opponents and for the people watching. I don't think... And I'm not saying you make them expert painted, but put some shit on your models and paint them green. Paint Hulk green and put a wash on him and paint his pants purple or whatever they are. Like, come on. Have some respect for it. I don't like that argument anyway. I do think you should be able to print cards out because fuck buying random boxes just to get like Helios or something like that. But that being said, I appreciate anyone who watched this video. I may be dropping another one later today. I'm talking about Sam some more. We'll see. And yeah, I'll see you online. Thanks, everyone.